So we'll do the formal release of the book by just holding it up.
Yeah.
Didn't do any wrapping for obviously.
So would request Jairamji to please offer his request.
You're
not following the sequence.
Oh, this is
The
okay.
sequence is at the end. So.
Oh, okay.
It's okay, whichever. Sheila Ji and Mark.
Okay, then let Ms. Sheila Jasanoff speak.
I think you're assuming I'm leaving early.
No.
Well, obviously the printed word governs and not anything else, but if it's written in the program, that's how we have to do it. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to be asked to play a part in the launching of this amazing project. It's beautiful, I mean, as you've already seen, not just the colors, but the spiral in the design is one of these geometrical shapes that invites you to think about unending beginnings and ends. So in that sense, the India Unshackled as part of the spiral is quite emblematic of what the book is trying to do. So just a few words about what attracted me particularly about this book. One is that coming from a completely different place in science and technology studies, we've been thinking a lot about imaginaries, so it's particularly interesting to have this two strands of thought coming from different places come and meet each other. One of the distinctions, I mean, so Ashish, I appreciate your saying that this is not just a thing for academics, but I hope you would use academics, believing that they also have a part to play in the discussions that are involved here. So one of the distinctions that Ashish implicitly made and that Joy and he made in the introduction is the difference between an imagination and an imaginary. An imaginary is something more, in a sense, more structured, but also in a sense more open-ended. I mean, it's not just about a fleeting thought that you have in your mind's eye or a dream, but rather something that is to some degree grounded in a promise of action. And I think it's collective. I mean, this is a point that's worth stressing, that an imagination can be in some individual person's mind, but the imaginaries that form the backbone of this book are to some extent collective projects, reflected in the fact that many of the chapters themselves are collective products, and in that sense they're about creating here on Earth and not just in that dreamy state that Ashish was warned off against being in when he was a schoolboy. I mean, it's an on-the-ground articulation of visions of alternative ways to be. The word hegemonic or anti-hegemonic has been used quite a lot, and already in this session, but also in this morning's session in the symposium that Rajeshwari and others organized. And part of the anti-hegemonic imagination of the imaginaries in this book is the diversity, the heterogeneity. So it is the daunting 600 pages, though I'm delighted to hear that the chapters will be downloadable individually, because that is actually a way in which we get to tell students that there are these other things. And you know, one of the things I'm very much hoping to do is to get some of these chapters after we have escaped the strictures of the publisher, to get my students at Harvard to read it in their classes on environmental politics and on technology and politics. And you know, in this way, I think that the book has this sort of Osiris-like quality, that it's parts that are scattered, but they're also pulled together to form a single body. And I think that dimension is something that appeals to me, that these alternative futures are not unitary, they're not single-minded, they don't go in a linear way from one beginning to one end, as I say, captured in this spiral diagram itself. I think that a good book is often talking against something as well as to something, and it's clear both explicitly and implicitly that this is talking in a way against our common future. The Brundtland Commission's 1987 report, which was an achievement in and of itself, because that Brundtland Commission report of 1987 did underscore that we're on this planet. We can't get off of it easily, except in our imaginations, maybe. Shiv Vishwanathan, in his, as usual, brilliant preface to the book, talks a lot about science fiction and the fact that it frees one's mind up. But Shiv also makes the point that in India, perhaps above all, one does not need fiction to escape, because India already is a land of fictions and multiple fictions and heterogeneous forms, and he calls attention to the fact that in Hindu mythology there are already enough monsters and enough hybrids and enough chimeras and so forth to keep us all going without needing a Star Wars cantina scene to first bring that sort of idea to life. The Brundtland Commission's achievements were twofold. One, to say that economics and ecology did not have to be separate. So it was sustainable. People say sustainability all the time now, but remember that the classic formulation back then was sustainable development. And the idea was that you could have this thing called development and also to make it sustainable. So the dichotomy that people had constructed before that you can't have ecology and economics at the same time. It was an attempt to say, no, 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 you can have both. You can have economic self-sufficiency and growth and adequacy, but you can have ecological sustainability as well. And the other thing was to suggest that there is a need for global thinking, that there is a need for thinking that we should care about and be stewards of the planet and of each other, and not be bound down, tied down to parochialisms that leads to violence of all sorts of different kinds. Well, it's been, what, 40 years now? No, 30 years now. And pages have been turned and cycles have been gone through. And today we recognize that the very idea of pushing everybody towards this single, our common future, did itself have a latent element of violence in it. And I think one of the things that the book tries to dissolve and tries to do away with is that idea that somehow we are all in this Procrustean bed of sustainability in which everybody has to be cut down to a particular size and shape. So yesterday I had the slightly weird experience of being in the IIC annex just across the way. And I came back from something and was just sitting there talking to a colleague, and that colleague said, look, there's the Harvard South Asia program. I had no idea that the Harvard South Asia program was having an event right there, but I said, you're kidding, but he wasn't kidding. There was indeed something organized by the Harvard South Asia program, and the main speaker they had invited was somebody from Harvard Public Health School, and I asked him what his topic was, and he said stunting in South Asia. So in a way, that is that is emblematic again of this single monopolistic way of imagining what the problems of the world are. Now we all know that stunting is something that's been put on the map by the president of the World Bank. It's the latest of endless indicators that the bank puts forward about what is the matter with our civilization and our world. But stunting is such a crazy word. I mean, of course it refers to inadequate nutrition and the growth of children, and all of us, I think, can resonate with that dimension of it. Nobody wants children to go hungry. My mother was president of the UN Women's Guild for a couple of years in New York towards the later part of her active life, and the UN Women's Guild had a little poem that they dutifully printed on all of their things that they had for sale. And one of the lines was, thus released from hunger, fear, and need. I mean, this was an envisioning of a future for all children. So we can resonate with that, but at the same time, something rubs me personally, the wrong way when I hear that a colleague of mine from the Harvard School of Public Health is coming and giving and being celebrated for giving a talk on stunting in South Asia, because stunting is a word that's often used of the imagination and not just of the body. And this way of reducing all of the problems of development to a sort of singular measure and a singular way of thinking about then what is the right way forward quickly becomes, a set of projects that then all start looking standardized, and before you know it, you're doing calorie counts and importing foodstuffs that are grown with GM technologies. I mean, suddenly the world starts looking like a place that is very, very different from what is contained in the pages of this book. So I find this book a refreshing antidote, a revolutionary set of counter proposals. I do think that Shiv Viswanathan is right in about one other thing that he says in his preface, which is that he would have preferred some darker tones as well, that there is a friction between utopianism and dystopianism. My own adopted political system, the US one, is currently going through a rather dystopic imagination of what an electoral democracy ought to look like. And I think if we're going to have regeneration, we need to think of the dystopic along with the utopic. Maybe that is partly the answer to a non-empty utopia, that the utopia that has no room for the dystopic in it risks becoming something that kind of fades off into the sunset, without ever touching down anywhere. And to some degree, I found the concluding chapter of the book intriguing because it actually ended up positing a set of things that reminded me of Edward Bellamy's book, Back to the Future, which was a well-known sci-fi work of the late 19th century, and it too had no room in it for frictions of any kind, and yet World War I was about to break out within a couple of decades. So, I think that going forward in a realistic way, with the resources that this book so amply offers, we should situate ourselves in a place where the great imaginaries that are illustrated here, all the more living and vibrant because people are actually living them, they're not just imagining them, that attached to them are a set of problems and challenges as well. And I don't want to use policy language like scale up or whatever, or standardization, but it's well to keep in mind that these are not absent from our world, and there are people out there wanting to press us all into the imaginary of stunting, when your book is attempting to free us from precisely that kind of imagination.